The Wings Over New Zealand show is brought to you in association with the Wings Over New Zealand Aviation Forum, New Zealand's #1 aviation discussion forum online. There you'll find discussion on all aspects of New Zealand aviation, from history to current affairs, and thousands of photos covering the Royal New Zealand Air Force, airlines, general aviation, warbird restorations, airshow news, sport aviation, home building, gliding, aviation media, and much, much more. You'll be in good company with other aviation enthusiasts, including pilots, engineers, warbird owners and restorers, historians and authors, modelers, aviation photographers, and many others. Sign up to the Wings Over New Zealand community now. It's free and easy. Just Google Wings Over New Zealand and you'll find the forum.
Hi everybody, Andrew Gormley, CEO of Classic Flyers here. If you're interested in classic aviation and you want to get up close and personal to old aircraft and see some of New Zealand's aviation history, come across the Classic Flyers, Jean Batten Drive, Mount Maunganui, right on the edge of the airport. You can go for flights in old aeroplanes like Boeing Stearmans and Harvards. There's lots to see. Kids' parties happening here all the time. We have functions and function rooms, business meetings, and a great cafe with excellent coffee. If you'd like to be involved with Classic Flyers, we also have the volunteer groups who do all things from helping out with function work or just on the main hangar floor with visitors and guests or birthday parties, right through to engineers who get involved in restoring some of our wonderful old aircraft assets. These things are all part of New Zealand's aviation history. It's a great place and it's in a good location. Come and have a visit. Check out the website on www.classicflyersnz.com.
Hi, Melanie here from Aviation Tours, unique itineraries for aviation enthusiasts, taking you to some of the most amazing air shows and events in the UK and Australia. They're leisurely, comfortable, fun, escorted, and to all the places you've been wanting to visit. If independent travel's out of your comfort zone, or you just prefer the good company of fellow enthusiasts on a tour taking in the best aviation, motoring and military museums, take a look at our website aviationtoursnz.com for more info and join us on the trip of a lifetime. Or call me for a chat on 021 076 8308.
Welcome to the Wings Over New Zealand show. I'm your host, Dave Homewood. In this episode, we hear the last of the recordings from the Wings Over New Zealand 20th Anniversary WONZ Forum Meet at Wigram, and the speaker is Phillip Harrall. Phillip was an observer in the Royal Navy on Lynx helicopters during the Falklands War, and he told us a bit about it.
Right. Quick chat on the Falklands campaign. It was never listed as a war because the Treasury would have to open the coffers and pay for it. So it stayed as a campaign. I did put, what did you do in that war, Daddy? Because my children didn't see me for quite a long time and they were growing up. Right. Conflict or war, we talked about that. The Treasury was too tight-fisted to pay for it. But really there were problems going on in Argentina at the time. The junta had its problems at home. They looked as though they were engineering a distraction, and they went for the name of Operation Rosario, which apparently is a religious colour of blue, which is the most religious colour you can get, to retake the Falklands and South Georgia. The Foreign Office had a clue. For those of you who've ever worked with the State Department or the Foreign Office, this is what they wrote in blue. There was a very big station of the Secret Intelligence Service in Argentina. They didn't have a clue. And that's Cape Pembroke, as you see on the Falkland Islands there. So with about 12 hours warning, they got a quick indication, there could be trouble coming, chaps. You might want to do something. You know, like stop drinking tea and get out and fight. Where the islands are, right down the bottom here, quite close to Argentina. And that map that is up there is actually from grey seals. That's where the biggest bits of the seals are, but it's just to show you the various bits of the island of the West Falklands and then East Falkland and Stanley at Port Harriet, and then we'll come into Fox Bay, which is which is burnt into my memory. I'll tell you why shortly. Right, Operation Corporate was the name. The Ministry of Defence in London has a computer that generates names for exercises and or for operations, and it was corporate this time. Known by the press as the Empire Strikes Back. Bloody press. So that was the point of invasion of the Falkland Islands. Now Georgia had taken place. There was a UN Security Resolution 502. The UK had the right to defend its territories. Maggie Thatcher, love her or hate her, she did a brilliant job. This man was a complete idiot. I think he's dead, so I can say that out loud. He was the Minister of Defence at the time, and all he wanted to do was save money. And save money was get rid of people, get rid of people, get rid of ships, get rid of all sorts of things. The first Sea Lord at the time decided that he had not been invited to a cabinet meeting, but he turned up in full dark blue uniform with medals and told Margaret Thatcher that we could do something in return to retaliate. And she agreed. So, assemble a task force. We had one in the UK and we had a deployed group already in the Mediterranean. So we had 2 UK task groups, one coming out of Portsmouth on the south coast and one coming out of Plymouth further down the south coast. Everybody embarked as fast as they could. All leave was cancelled. I was at home with my parents in Scotland with my 7-month pregnant wife as we were on our way to the States to go to United States Navy Test Pilot School as a test NFO. When I got off the train in Scotland, my father met me and said, "You've got to go back." Now, my father and I often did fight with each other, but I thought that was a bit quick. as I'd only really just arrived. So we got back to the house and he said, "You're going to need to phone the squadron." So I phoned the squadron and sure enough, we'd been recalled. So we stayed overnight, got the train back down the next day. It was pretty well chaos in the squadrons. Everyone was trying to figure out what to do with spares, what maps, etc., etc., etc. So it became quite tricky. And we were given a very short time and everybody embarked in either the carriers or the frigates or what was going on to go south. I did not, because I'll come on to that. Once we got to Ascension Island, formulating plans, and we had to change all the tactics and code words. I had been the training officer for the Argentinian people who bought Lynx. So that was quite entertaining in 1980. So the only thing that they ever really wanted to talk about was the World Cup soccer and not really worry about flying the aeroplane. So they knew our code words and they knew our tactics. We taught them to them. So we had to sit down and change them. And that took quite a while. And it was very interesting that on the way down to the Maritime Exclusion Zone, the 200-mile circle around the Falkland Islands, we were going to go into fight. A lot of people thought we weren't going to do it. There was a lot of emphasis on the UN and all sorts of, what do they call it, shuttle diplomacy taking place. But about a third of us thought we're really in this for the beginning. There is Ascension Island, where we all met, right in the middle of bloody nowhere. And it looks like a volcanic mushroom. It's just this big dark earth, black earth, sitting on top of it. But everybody was there. All the ship's captains came ashore. The Royal Marines, paras, the rest of it, all came ashore, and they met and decided what they were going to do. There was never an operation order. There was a collection of signals, but there was never an op order put on the table. Everyone went back to their ships with an idea that we're going south, we'll do what we can, and we'll keep talking. I was left behind because we have different specializations in the Royal Navy, and there's a constant battle between us and the Air Force for their designations. And at the beginning of the Second World War, all observers were called observers. And it was halfway through the Second World War that the RAF decided to rename their observers as navigators. So there's always this conflict between observers and navigators, and we always say that we can chew chewing gum and walk at the same time. They can't. No, I apologise to navigators at the moment. So I was also the warfare instructor on the squadron, which again is a 6-month course to become a warfare instructor, and I was running the trials on various bits of kit in the aircraft. One of them was looking at chaff and flare suspension from a helicopter using the American LE-39. One of the reservations we had, and apologies to some of you in the audience who were here last Tuesday night when I was speaking about electronic warfare, was that we felt we couldn't get, as a slow-moving helicopter at 120 knots, far enough away from the cloud of chaff for it to be a distraction for a missile with a proximity fuse. So this is what the trial was about, to make sure we could. We went up to Westfrew in Scotland. It's right opposite Belfast. It's a horseshoe bay. It's quite large. And it was the home for all live 500 and 1,000 pound practice and live bombs in that area there. And that's where they had the big saddleback buoys that you could see as targets. They also had the best tracking systems in the UK of two radars and about 7 kinesiodolites. So that was what we were going to do. When we actually ran in on the first run, we plotted how we were going to run in past their buoys at a target, and a set distance from the radar head, we would brake left and right and fire the chaff accordingly. I thought I had it sorted out. The sea spray radar is 90-90 either side of the nose, and it's very high definition. I could see the buoys, I could see the target area, everything. And the range controller came up and said, "You're about 1 foot high and 6 inches to the left. Do you want us to control you?" Yeah, okay. There is no pride in authorship, so that's what we did. It was a great success. This was the final phase, and we were looking to fire up all 60 chaff in one particular go. When we did it, I hadn't really paid any attention to the wind because it had suddenly increased quite badly. This was a 500-foot run. We were normally running in at 50 feet. We ran in at 500 feet, pulled hard left, fired the upwind, and then rolled and fired the other upwind turn. So both dispensers were got rid of. When we landed on, there was a phone call from an irate sheep farmer, the other side of the bay, where the wind had taken the chaff clouds across it, complaining that his sheep were covered in some sort of reflective tape, and he didn't know what it was. So we got in the car and drove across to have a look at it, and it was like something from a 1970 rock concert. All these sheep were covered in chaff. And they weren't munching it, luckily, and then the guy who came with us was from, if you like, was what's called the Treasury Solicitor. He had the checkbook. And that's when we decided that the definition of pedigree is the animal you've just run over. And all his sheep were pedigree sheep. So he got a big check from us. The other trial we were doing was with the Sea Skua anti-ship missile. I'd fired about 3 of these at Aberporth Range in Wales, and the final trial was target jamming of the Lynx radar, which was very, very good. The radar is very powerful, it's very high definition. You can see when you're being jammed, you get a spoke. When you lock on, the radar goes like a fighter radar. You just get 2 straight bars above it, and you can see the target dot. The minute he started to jam me, the target dot glows, and I get indication that there's jamming coming in through the radar, and I can change the missile into home on jam. What I couldn't do is change it back again once it's left the aircraft. So those trials were completed very quickly. We put it all together and wound up going down south quite quickly. These are the orange crop ESM aerials on the back of the aircraft, and that's the chaff dispenser. And that's the controller that sat down by my right knee on there, so you could actually dial in the various bits and pieces that you can do. That's a Sea Skua missile. Sorry about the Alame stuff. I'm not sponsored by them. They're the only one with a decent shot. And it's basically about just under 2 meters long. It's got a 15 kilogram warhead with a, fragmentation blast to it, and it's designed to go straight through the skin of fast patrol boats. That's what it was designed against. But unfortunately, because everything changed, it was going to be used against whoever we fired it at. So very successful, very lightweight. It drops about 15 feet below the aircraft before the booster motor fires. So it's not an off-the-rail type missile, which is great. And there's a little bit there that when the radar locks on, it goes into a fixed frequency. So it stops being frequency agile, but it then kicks into PRF jitter, or if you're American, PRI, into jitter. So that gives us a little bit of control over it. That last frequency is bounced up the back of the missile, so the head knows what to look for. And you can fire it at about just short of 10 miles. And it has 4 different heights that you can set on it, and you just pick the height to go.
Can you fire on the move or only in the hover?
No, you don't want to fire it in the hover. You want to have some force over the top. You can fire it in the hover. But what happens is that we run it against the targets day or night at 50 feet. At the 50 feet, normally about 12 miles from the targets, we'll brake left and right to pick up a 90 degree on the target, to split the target. And as we run in and pull up, you have to pull up to about 100 feet. So A, you can get the radar to lock, and then B, you can get the missiles to clear below you and fire. And then they go down to one of 4 heights. And the lowest height is about 6 inches. And that was because of going for fast patrol boats yet again. This thing is subsonic when it goes. You don't really know it because it just drops away from you. But everything's controlled by the observer, by the radar, and the weapon system is all on my side of the aircraft. Hence, we used to use this phrase in the Lynx fleet, which I apologise now to our American military pilots, is that the observer seat was always considered the intellectual seat, while he was the muscle memory. Boy, did I get punched for that. I'm going quite quickly, but I don't think we'll catch up the time. One of the trials that it was decided by their lordships, the Admiralty Board, is that we should take some form of thermal imager with us down south. This again dropped into my lap as the warfare instructor on 815. We went up to Farnborough, the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough, where all the people with pointy heads and slide rules sticking out of their nostrils live. And it was a really rough time because we didn't give them a lot of time to come up with anything. They had stuff on the shelves. And when we went to the fixed-wing boys, the thermal imager that they could offer us was about the size of a shoebox. When we went to the Rotary Wing boys, it was almost a 2-meter spherical sphere, which would go on the side of the aircraft with the camera mounted inside it. And the two did not talk to each other, which was a great shame. So we wound up with this sphere. And they did a fit for us very quickly down at the engineering school at Daedalus, as you see there on Leon Solent. And they gave me a pilot who had just literally finished the transition course to Lynx, a young 18-year-old chap, great guy. He's actually now a professional golfer, but that's neither here nor there. And we did the flying trials, basically to see the stability of the aircraft, because you've got this huge ball, beach ball on the side of the aeroplane. What was the lateral control like? What was it like in an auto-rotation? And did it impact the aircraft? And in fact, it didn't. It was good enough to fly without it. So the aircraft went back to my home base at Yeovilton. All naval bases in the UK start with HMS as a ship and then have a ship's name. All the Fleet Air Arm bases have the names of seabirds. Just goes back to 1918. So the aircraft was broken down and fitted into a Charlie 130. To do that, you have to take the rotor blades off, and then the Lynx fits into the C-130 quite well. We flew down to Ascension Island via Dakar, and it was rebuilt in Ascension Island. That was at the same time as everybody else was there discussing what they were going to go and do. Rebuilt the aircraft, test flew it, and we embarked on HMS Invincible to go south. I had no pilot by the time. We left the other guy behind to graduate. So it was going to pick up a pool pilot who had rushed down from 815 Squadron when we got there. Went to land on Invincible, and it was very interesting because the commander air, the air boss, if you like, was the CEO of my old squadron, and he started to harangue me as I was walking down the deck, thinking, this is going really well. And they put the aircraft onto the 2 lifts. They've got 2 lifts on these Invincible glass carriers, and they were only ever designed to go up and down once a day. The guy who designed them did not listen to the brief that these things go up and down with monotonous regularity. So they're on great big scissor jacks. So they put the Lynx on the lift, and as I turned to walk to the thing, they just put it straight down the lift without taking the rotor blades off. And it fitted by about 2 inches around the disc. So my war was almost over before we even started. And it also came back up on the lift, which is quite useful. But what we had to do, one of the things that came apparent was that normally from a good idea in the UK to making frontline service is anywhere between 3 to 5 years. This all happened between 12 to 18 months to complete, but we could do them in a matter of weeks. So when we had to do it, we could do it, and we weren't being held back. Right, down south, everything kicks off, and away we go. 3rd of May, the Argentinian ship, it's an ocean-going tug called Sobral, was acting as an intelligence gathering ship, an AGI. and it had wormed her way under the cover of darkness into the task force, which was, she was actually on the edge of the task force, to be fair to her. And it was decided that she would be attacked by lynx. Mindful of the fact I was the only bloke down south who'd fired the bloody thing and had handed out huge, do you remember Gazettener printers? You turn them around and the paper comes out. I had those of how to fire the missile. I went from every ship that had a lynx on board, giving them the Gazettener copies of how to fire the missile. So I was sitting on the back of broadsword. This was all going on. We got scrambled. I had 2 Skua on one side and the big beach ball on the other. And HMS Coventry and HMS Glasgow's Lynx were given the clearance to attack. I was told to take photographs on the thermal imager. I was absolutely furious because I wanted to get in on it. They both attacked. They did the 90 split on her, and Glasgow fired low and Coventry fired high. Coventry's hit the bridge. Glasgow's went in at the side and did all the damage. I was then told to go in and finish it off, and then got pulled back just as I was running in at about 10 miles, was told to cancel the attack because it was going to be better to let it limp back into port with bits of it missing and dead bodies on board, which was a bit sad. So that was the first time Sea Skua had been fired in anger. And it was very interesting because it was also the first time the guys from Coventry and Glasgow had been fired at. I'd been fired at in Northern Ireland several times. And in fact, the first time I'd been fired at in a lynx was in Scotland, doing fishery protection for salmon smuggling. And you fly with it, because it's Scotland and it's a different set of laws, you fly with a policeman in the back of the aircraft. And we'd gone into a bay chasing a fast-moving boat who was about to offload his salmon. And the guy turned around and fired both barrels of a 12-bore into the bottom of the aircraft. So that was the start of it. And the policeman was quite indignant. I said, it's my aeroplane. Anyway, back to combat. Sheffield, the very next day. This is a bit of a goat, and it's quite tricky. If you read some of the books, you'll get a completely different complexion of what actually happened at the time. And also the official record is slightly off as well. Because the lynx, that's my lynx there, believe it or not, was so good at its orange crop and its ESM, they decided that me in particular and one other would spend our time between 8,000 and 12,000 feet over the top of the Falklands looking for EW intercepts for the fast jets coming in. This was not my idea because a fast jet radar, as you know, is a very thin beam. And if you're sitting at 12,000 feet and he's looking at the coast, you're not going to see his beam. But their lordship thought that time spent on reconnaissance is not time wasted. So I was about 8,000 feet above this lot as it all happened. And it started to get very, very confusing because Glasgow was on the gun line with Sheffield and Plymouth, and they just finished bombarding into the area that they were given as a task. And they pulled away and they decided that Sheffield would decide to change or clear her signal traffic. To do that, they used the maritime satellite stuff, which is behind the smoke, which blocked their India band ESM receiver. And India band is important because that's the radar frequency that was being used by the étendards. So they didn't see the étendard coming. Glasgow saw the étendards break from the coast on her radar and called it, saying inbound raid, blah, 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 blah. They fired the Exocet and it hit Sheffield just there, because there's where the aiming mark is. That's a joke. That was so that we didn't mix them up with the Argentinian Type 42 destroyers, which was my principal role, was to go and get them. And the missile did not explode. The warhead did not detonate. There was a young sailor sitting on top of just about there is the engine room administration office. And he was sat there with his feet on his desk, came with a cup of tea, and the missile went under his legs. And he thought, that's a bit odd. And so what it did do is it hit a diesel tank. And that's where the fire started. But the head itself did not explode. So there was a big fire on board. And a lot of people were saved by the XO of the frigate, who was another aviator, Lynx 8, who wasn't a Lynx-seeking aviator, had said to his ship's company, look, don't ditch your gas masks just yet, We felt there might be a chance of some form of gas attack from the Argentinians, so we were all carrying gas masks 24 hours a day. And it came in the night before, don't carry your gas masks anymore. He decided that his ship's company should continue their gas masks, and that saved quite a lot of people, because they put their gas masks on and walked out through the smoke, which meant the filter went very quickly, but they still had 30 or 45 seconds of air inside their masks. And there are 21 people killed on board. And if he hadn't had the gas masks on, they'd probably lost a bit more. So well done him. I came down off the high height. Glasgow had called that obviously there'd been an impact. One of the Type 21s went alongside her to get things going. And then the Rothsey, the gunship that was ahead of them, put her Gemini in the water with the idea of taking across a Rolls-Royce pump to help pump bits out of Glasgow. As the coxswain fired the Gemini engine up, other ships in the task force called torpedo, torpedo, torpedo. This was absolute chaos now. I was on anti-air warfare net going on at the time, and we were trying to relay back to Hermes. It wasn't a torpedo, it was the Gemini, but they heard torpedo and that was it. It all went a bit screwy from there. We went across to Sheffield and winched up their ops officer and took him to Hermes, the flagship, for a hot debrief. And Nick Batho is his name. Unfortunately, he took the fall, and I think that was wrong. He did a really good job as the anti-air warfare officer and the ops officer of the ship, but they just decided that they would clear their signal traffic, or the captain decided to clear the signal traffic and blinded the EW kid. That's the result of the fire, and that's her being towed away shortly before she rolled over and sank. Right, Sea Harrier collision on the 10th of May. John Eaton-Jones, who's a great bloke, and Al Curtis. Those of you from the A4 world may know Al Curtis. Right, he was a Brit who came down here and then went back up. It was a really horrible day. It was thick fog and it was bloody miserable. I was going up to about 8,000 feet, and as I went through 4,500 feet, I got a radar contact 22 miles ahead of me that disappeared. So it was a sinker, it's a submarine. I called it, and the two Harriers were on their cap stations a long way ahead of me, and for some unknown reason they decided to take the two Harriers down off their cap station rather than me get there 11 minutes later, and they hit each other in the fog, and they were both killed, which I felt a bit bad because I'd called the contact. And that's just another picture of the Sea Spray radar with the clever bits for the missile blanked out, probably by pen than anything else. Al Curtis had shot down a Canberra the day before. So that was a bit of a loss, not to the enemy, but to they hit each other. Great shame. That's what an unexploded 1,000-pound bomb can do to a Lynx. It came in through the side, my aircraft's in the hangar, it's a double hangar. So there's two aircraft in the hangar already. This one is an ASW fit, which is very rare, and we'd borrowed that off the Americans as a mad bird. Dear Uncle Sam, we know where your mad kit is. It's on the side of that, not terribly well. Bomb came in through the side, hit a vertical support for the ship, came straight up through the deck and went over the side and did not explode, luckily. The only person injured was one of the Chinese laundrymen. When the bomb came in through the side, he was stood next to it as it went through and up. So we had to transship him across to somewhere else. He wasn't a happy bunny. You can see the damage that's done to the nose. That's going to really ruin your radar returns just a bit. And one of the biggest problems was that Mark 46 torpedo. It's a great torpedo, but it's full of auto fuel. Auto fuel burns with no oxygen. It just keeps going. It will kill you if you smell it. It will kill you if you taste it. All our magazines had to be painted with a white floor, just in case it dripped. So the clue was not to go, I wonder what that is. So that's why basically the tarpaulin is covering the hole on the deck, but also to try and figure out what they're going to do with that. They got the flight and air material off it, which is the parachute at the back. But in the end, they took my aircraft back out, pushed him back in, and then robbed it blind, used it as spares. HMS Heckler incident. All of these involve me at the moment, which is a bit of a wrong way of doing it. Again, another late sortie, 3 o'clock in the morning. We're in the sector southeast, which is a very quiet area that we would expect. And by this time, I'd struck up a really good working relationship with the electronic warfare guys on HMS Hermes. And our search height was anywhere between 4,500 feet and 12,000 feet. There's a reason for the 4,500 feet. Is in their infinite wisdom, their lordships decided not to pressurize the radar waveguide in the sea spray radar. It goes off at 5,000 feet. So you go radar blind at 5,000 feet. So up to 12,000 feet, looking around, nothing much coming in for quite a while. We've got both of the extra fuel tanks in the back, which means you've got just under 6 hours endurance. The only problem is if you put both fuel tanks in, you can't read the gauge on the one that's on the right-hand side. So you have to get out of your seat, unstrap, and get a torch and look around the corner for the fuel gauge. So we came back, we're going up and down because we were icing quite a lot. We got down to 1,500 feet. The radar came back online as we went through 4,000. I picked up a radar contact and thought, well, that's a bit strange because there was nothing in that area. So again, we didn't know what it was. And I got a really strange radar intercept off it. I couldn't identify the radar, and quite often, if it's an India band radar, 8 to 10 gigs, it's probably some form of commercial radar. So it'll be anywhere between 3.4, 3.6 area rotation rate, and probably around about the 800 PRF. This thing is wobbling while I'm trying to get it. And it's not my kit that's going wrong, I can't identify the radar. So again, talking back to the flagship, I'm talking to the warrant officer. He couldn't identify it. There's an American book which you guys may know called Office of Naval Intelligence called STIX. It's about that thick by that. It's got every known radar to man in it with its parameters. He's flicking through that trying to identify it, and we still couldn't identify it. I mean, it's just heading towards the task force. So I eventually get the okay to engage. So again, I've got 2 Sea Skuas on the right-hand side, and the code word to attack was issued. Now, the code word that was used was confiscate, and it was used as confiscate because no Spaniard can pronounce it. Now, if you've ever seen any Basil Fawlty films from John Cleese, it was just like that. So we got confiscate, away we went, and I just felt like you can read on the bottom line there, something was not quite right. Now, my pilot was a chap called Al Harper, and he'd done about 7 tours in Northern Ireland. I'd done 5 by then, so we knew each other quite well. He was a commando pilot, so we actually worked quite well together. And I just said to him, the Fleet Air Arm is a very strange organisation, in as much as the senior aircrew member on board is captain of the aircraft. So in this case, it was me. And it's always been that way since about 1918 onwards. It's just the way they do their business. And I think it comes from Nelson's days. Everything else does. And the point was that I'd said to him, look, I think we should identify this. We're in thick fog, and it's freezing fog. So he went, okay. And his voice went up a couple of octaves. We came round on the radar, flew up its stern, and into his radar blind spot. Switched the landing lamp on, as you can see there, and I can get him into a quarter of a mile on the sea spray radar with no trouble at all. So we're actually back at 60 knots in fog, a quarter of a mile. We both looked up, and it was HMS Hecla, who is actually a hydrographer's ship, and she'd been converted into a Red Cross or hospital ship. So we could have quite legally just taken out one of our own and sunk it. And it was just the hairs on the back of my neck did the old, something just does not feel right. So always trust your gut on something like that. I never did meet the captain of the ship, but we did find out later that his weapons electrical senior chief had decided to play with their radar, and that's why nobody could identify it. What he did, I don't know, but anyway, it nearly cost him his life. New Zealand's response, what happened was that Canterbury took over the patrol in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, from the RN warships. So Thatcher wrote, as you can see there, you won the hearts of all of the people, blah, 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 to Muldoon. So that's what New Zealand did, stepped in and took over the coverage in the Gulf for us. Nearly 3,000 people killed or injured in 45 days. You can see them there. Falkland Islands, 3 women that were killed. 2 of them were in Goose Green when they broke cover and ran from behind the church to go down the hill. And they got picked off very quickly, unfortunately. And the RAF officer, there's only one of them that was killed. And that was just an accident when he crashed. And those were the two Hong Kong laundrymen were killed on Coventry. Now, my previous ships were HMS Sheffield and HMS Coventry. My wife, being heavily pregnant, was not keen on the news every night when they told them about another ship had been lost, Sheffield and Coventry. So I was not very welcome on anybody else's ship at the time. RFA, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, these are our oilers that come round. They're part of the Royal Navy, but they're civil. They're master mariners on there. As you can see there, of non-fatal casualties that were there. So quite a lot of people in a very short time. Admiral Lord Lewin, who was the first Sea Lord, I love this from him. He didn't, but, but he always thought that that's what he should have said. And there's another picture of Larry the Lynx there with a stingray. Right, what happened next? I've got 2 class sides. At the end of that, I wound up going straight to USN TPS on the class of 83 and wound up flying the aircraft you see there, the 60B, the Cobra, and the Sea Sprite. And because I was a backseater with ex-fixed-wing experience, the Fast Attack guys, as they were known, Fast Attack Directorate, was short of NFOs. Naval Flight Officer, which is what they call their race eaters. So I managed to get 3 trips in an F-14, which is great. The first one, they didn't trust me at all. The radar was gagged. Every other switch was just about ripped out of the back. I was at 180 pounds of fuel they'd rather have. And that was how it worked. But by the 3rd time, they let me use the radar, and I was quite impressed. But it was a bit clunky compared to some of the other stuff. That's my wife, myself, being decorated by the Queen for an Air Force Cross, which is unusual for the Navy to get one, because normally you get a Distinguished Service Cross, but I got that for gallantry, or actually stupidity is what I got it for. I landed at the telephone number thinking it was the grid reference, but that is the Typhoon submarine. Those of you who are here on Tuesday will know the full story behind that. Basically, every 2 years or so, the Royal Navy goes up into international waters north of the Russian islands and steams around in there, pretending they're having great fun. A bit like the Chinese warships to the north of here at the moment. We had been warned that there were 3 new submarines that were out there, the Typhoon, the Oscar, and the Mike. I got this guy at 35 miles on radar and thought, this is pretty big. And as we closed in on it, we realized it was a submarine. So we came at him out of the sun, as you always do, and we reckoned that we could land 3 Lynxes down there and probably 3 or 4 up the front. That's how big he was. He's got all his masts up, so he knows we're there. But he didn't switch on until we actually hovered alongside him, taking photographs, whereupon the attack periscope comes whistling around, sees us, goes click, drop, and bang, he's gone. He was there a short time. Now, the problem was we couldn't tell what it was, because although we'd been told about these 3 submarines, nobody'd seen them. So we didn't have schematics, we didn't have any photographs, and it wasn't until once that film was developed that they realized it was a Typhoon, which was good. Then across to the Standing Naval Force Atlantic, which is good, whereas I wound up at the Sea Over Squadron, which was consisted of 7 different nations, of most of them Lynx operators, and I had a great time with that. I took over the squadron in Edinburgh, in Scotland, when they came in for a change of command. And I thought I'd better get this over with quickly. Went to see the Germans. They had 2 Lynx embarked. The Dutch had 2 Lynx. We had 2 Lynx embarked. We had 2 Sea Kings from the Canadians, and we had a Sea Sprite from the Americans. And I thought, I know, I'll go and sit with the Germans, because that'll be fun. So I shot off and went across in my tray, sat down, spoke to the Germans, and they said, while you're here, Well, here we go. And I said, yeah, what do you reckon? If it hadn't been for that fat bastard Goring doing what it did to our aircraft, we should have won. Don't mention the war when you go. But that's what they were like. And then on to St John's College, Cambridge, to do a Master's in Philosophy, which is one down from a PhD. It's not a master's degree in philosophy, it's an MPhil, it's an actual degree in the UK. It's basically your first year of a PhD in international relations, which I really needed to do. Oh, and I forgot to mention Rotary Wing test. The other clue is that lot there who I wound up joining. Any questions on my presentation? Now, I learnt this the hard way. If you don't put, I think I've just run out of laser. If you don't put on my presentation, when you're doing your instructor's course, they deliberately ask you questions like, why do you call your yellow jam marmalade? So, on my presentation, are there any questions?
Why do you call your yellow jam?
On my presentation. Right, sorry, that was very quick and dirty. But we will have caught some time up. Thank you.
That was the Wings Over New Zealand show with Dave Homewood.